welcome to Women in Conservation Wednesdays. Here today we are with Ennia Bosshard, who is a PhD student studying ecosystem restoration. So Ennia, could you tell me what you're currently doing?
Yeah, thanks so much, Millie. Thanks for having me as well. So I'm doing a PhD so I'm studying the role of plant pollinator networks in guiding restoration. And I'm looking especially at tropical forest ecosystem, and hopefully, if COVID allows it, the fieldwork that I will be doing is going to be in peatland forest, so quite a particular forest ecosystem in Indonesia. And I don't know how much should I talk about the research. I can talk loads about it or just keep it very short.
Yeah, please tell us more.
Yeah, so basically I'm really interested in restoration of forests. I've been doing lots of research for my undergraduate and master's on this as well. And while I'm really happy that I think restoration is now becoming such a global priority, also last year there was the launching of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and lots of forest restoration in that too. But, I think the main focus on lots of these efforts are at the moment still focusing on planting trees and how many trees are you planting, and there is a lack of really looking at the long-term effects and what success means in that too. So I can see, for example, I've worked in Southeast Asia for quite a while. They are just planting millions of trees, but they're not looking into what kind of species they're planting, what are the ecosystem functions and services that those restored ecosystems provide for sustaining genetic diversity and biodiversity, but also for people. So what my PhD is looking at is if you have these all interconnected, like biodiversity crisis, global climate change, also food security, poverty, especially in the tropics, and having pollinators kind of like at the intersection of all of these, because pollinators are so important to pollinate flowers, and lots of plants in the tropics are flowering plants. So they really help to reproduce and to support genetic diversity, but then also they pollinate lots of crops that we eat. And having this is kind of like one of the most important, I think, ecosystem functions and services that the forest provides, but they are not being considered in ecosystem restoration basically at all at the moment. So what I'm trying to do with my PhD is help consolidating this evidence base, how important pollinators are. So then we can build on that to really include it in the restoration efforts and help shaping what successful restoration means. Because at the moment it means, oh, we planted 100 million trees. But I don't think that doesn't say that it's gonna, if it's just 5 different species of trees, that's more like a plantation and not really like the ecosystem that we need. So I guess that's for me where the biggest fascination as well is when we talk about restoration. What are we trying to restore? Are we trying to rebuild something like a forest how it used to be in the past, or are we trying to create something maybe new that can help providing what people need but also what humans need? So taking, I guess, a more an interdisciplinary approach to this.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting and so cool and really important as well. So how did you get into the conservation sector?
I guess a classical story, like when I was a child, I loved to be in nature, I loved to climb trees and be in the forest. And so I grew up in Switzerland, and we actually grew up without a TV. So I spent most of my time outdoors anyways. And we also didn't have radio or newspapers, anything like that. But what we had was loads and loads of National Geographic magazines. So even before I was able to read, I just always looked at all the pictures and all the exotic places. And I always was like, one day I want to go and travel to these places. And I think the way they tell the stories as well is very inspiring and motivating, because they give examples of they don't just talk about the problems, but they give examples of what potential solutions could be. So I think that definitely got me quite early on really interested in that. But then also the first time I traveled to the tropics by myself, I was in Cambodia, and the plan was to go on a jungle trek for a couple of days. And in my head, it was going to be this lush forest, my first tropical forest with lots of different trees and animals. And I was so excited. And then reality was just completely different. It's really sad to see just loads of degraded and burned down forest. And we basically walked through like really gray, scarce landscape for a couple of days. And yeah, it was just really sad to see. Also, then a couple of weeks later, we traveled from south of Malaysia to the north towards Thailand. And I remember this one bus drive we had, which was basically just going through monocultures of palm oil. And while it was green and kind of like looks like there is forest, but just seeing how degraded it all was. When I then came back, I decided to study environmental science. And I think just generally seeing the pollution and forest degradation in these countries, definitely big motivation.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to your experience as well, seeing, unfortunately, all these degraded landscapes when they've expected to see all these beautiful, lovely, pristine forests.
Yeah, and it's not getting better, unfortunately.
Yeah. Moving on to something a bit more positive. What's your favourite memory from working in conservation so far?
The most beautiful memories I had was then going 2 years ago. I was in Malaysia again and working there in one of the national forests, and just seeing how beautiful these areas are and all the amazing things that people there are doing, working together with indigenous communities and local communities, and just being there and experiencing that was definitely an amazing experience and good memory. But I think in terms of actual conservation, because I'm still very early on in my career, and very often it feels like you're doing so much reading and research and learning skills, but you're just doing it for yourself and you're not actually contributing towards changing any of these things that you really want to change. And I think my favorite experience in conservation ever was actually when, after I had been working in Malaysia with the local research institute, I was working on my master thesis, and we were looking at plant material for restoration efforts there, so tree planting and seeds. And Malaysia has launched in January last year a 100 million tree planting campaign. And the director of this research institute that I was working with had a meeting with them before they launched it to kind of like help them guide and bring in his experience and expertise. And probably 2 sentences of his presentation, like there was one slide which was based on my results from my research, and it just was such an inspiring and motivating feeling to see that actually what I was doing was being used in the real world outside. And I think that still feeds a lot into, okay, I really want to make sure that not only the research that I do is scientifically sound and really good, but also that it gets to the people that can then create a change in these different countries.
Yeah, that must have been such a great and rewarding moment, knowing that what you're doing is actually like making a difference.
Yeah, tiny little bits. I mean,
yeah, as you said, you're only just getting started in your career in conservation, but have you found that being a woman has had an impact on your career so far at all?
I guess when you look at the nature of this career, when most of the time of the year I'm based somewhere in, I don't know, Europe. I don't know if you can count the UK to Europe anymore, but that's a different discussion. But if it's Switzerland or if it's the UK, like I'm somewhere based in a Western country where I feel, also because most of the work is desk-based, I don't really feel a big difference between being a woman or being a man. It is still very interesting to see how many women are in these early career stages. And then when you look at the supervisory committee and all the professors, they're basically all men. So that sometimes, I just had a while ago, so my committee are 3 men, and I'm now looking to work with local collaborators in Indonesia as well. And they're all men too. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it would be nice to have a woman as well. And then I think especially looking at the other part of my career, which is going out there and doing field work in other countries where there's different cultures, different religions. And I think there definitely, I've never had any bad experience, but I'm just more like considering more, okay, what do I wear? Where do I go out in the evening by myself? Do I make sure that I'm with other people? Or even now planning my field work for Indonesia, I would really love to have a female local collaborator there. It would just, I don't know, it would just make me feel a little bit, I don't know if safer is the right word, but it's just a good feeling if there's some other women around you. I don't know if you can relate to that.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the time other women feel safer in the company of other women.
Yeah.
It's just nice to have someone around, I guess. Someone like,
yeah, definitely.
Just finally, do you have any tips for people wanting to get into the conservation sector?
I find this question so difficult. I mean, there's so much. It also really depends on the people. I think for me, generally, one of the things that I would have maybe told myself when I was younger would just be to be more proactive and really have the courage to do what you really want to do. Because I think very often, especially if you are so fascinated by, it can be forests or turtles or any specific animal species, sometimes it sounds almost too good to be true that you can make this your career and your job. And I think some people then don't dare to like go for it and try to find or create opportunities. So I think if you are really passionate about something, then you should speak up and put your ideas out there and try to create those opportunities. And I think also, I mean, conservation is quite a broad term. It can mean so many things. If you define it as, okay, you want to contribute towards creating change in protecting nature or the way we live with nature or restore and conserve. But I think that doesn't necessarily, I mean, for us now, I guess, talking about coming here from Exeter University, there is this more traditional way when you study this and you do research, but there's so many other ways how we can contribute towards creating this change, which can be through podcasts or movies or music. There's so much you can do. So there's, I think, being proactive, but also being creative about how do you want to create this change and what skills are you bringing in and what passions are you bringing in.
Yeah, thank you so much. I definitely agree that there's more than one way that people can get into conservation. It doesn't always have to be this traditional route of going to university. There's plenty of other more creative ways which you just talked about.
They're all equally important as well. They have to work together. Also, there's this big gap of research not then getting out to the people that actually need it. And there's different ways how to create more connection and allow people to talk to each other.
Thank you for coming on our podcast today. I really enjoyed talking to you and hearing about your experiences and your research. It's been so interesting.
Thank you so much, Millie.